council being present, I wanted to call today's February 2nd, 2026 Roundtable Working City Council meeting to order. The call of the meeting is a Roundtable Working City Council meeting to discuss the results of the 2025 Cambridge Resident Survey. The first order of business is a roll call of members present. Interim Clerk Crane.
Councilor El-Zubi. Present. Vice Mayor Azim.
Present.
Present. Councilor Flaherty. Present. Present. Councilor McGovern. Absent. Councilor Nolan.
Present.
Present. Councilor Simmons. Councilor Simmons is absent. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler is absent. Councilor Zusi is absent. Mayor Siddiqui?
Present.
Present. And you have 5 members recorded as present and 4 recorded as absent.
Okay, per the rules, please join me.
Present, Madam Clerk. I'm sorry. I couldn't unmute myself.
Councilor Simmons is present.
Great. Per the rules, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance and then pause for a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Gavel. Per Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2025, adopted by the Massachusetts General Court and approved by the Governor, the city is authorized to use remote participation at meetings of the Cambridge City Council. In addition to having members of the council participate remotely, we've set up Zoom teleconference for public viewing. You can view the meeting via the city's open meeting portal or on the city's cable channel 22. Please note that the City of Cambridge audio and video records this meeting and makes it available to the public for future viewing. In addition, third parties may also be audio and video recording this meeting. So today, and welcome Councilor McGovern.
Councilor
Today
McGovern is present.
we'll have a presentation. In your packets, we have a presentation from the city and Polity Research Consulting 2025 Resident Opinion Survey. And then we have the roundtable presentation itself. So I will go to city staff who will lead the presentation. And after that, we'll have a discussion. I'll invite each counselor to ask up to 2 questions. You can have 1 question, but up to 2. And then after that, we'll go from there. But our scheduled time is to go now until 5:32, which is because we started a few minutes late. So with that, welcome Deputy City Manager Kathy Watkins and City Manager as well.
I think the city manager is joining as well. Don't know if you want to say any opening words or turn it over to Lee.
Thank you all. Happy to turn it over very quickly, but very excited. I think we do this now annually every year. It's always been interesting to see both how we're trending over time and also, as we've started over the last couple of years, benchmarking against other communities. And I think those results often both resonate with what I think we sort of feel, but it is a much more data-driven sense of where we are doing much better, where we have room for improvement. And I think always very interested in the council's reaction and how we also incorporate this as we think about both the new term and the upcoming budget cycle. So appreciate this time we have, and thank you, Mayor, for calling the roundtable.
Great. Good afternoon. My name is Lee Giannetti. I'm with the Communications and Community Engagement Office. It's a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. Joining us online is Ernie Pikopoulos of Polity Research. Ernie has been conducting every city's survey since the program started back in the year 2000. So he is a wealth of knowledge in terms of the history of this program. And together we're going to be giving today's presentation. And if Naomi, if you could share the screen. And if you could go right to slide 3. So for today's discussion, something we discovered the last time we did this is it was helpful for us to break the survey discussion into a number of sections. And as we go along, we can pause and see if there are any questions related to those topics, because there is a lot of content here. So really the way we've organized the content today is into 6 areas. The first one is really to help you all understand and for the public to remember what this is. So we'll talk a little bit about the methodology, and then we'll talk about the demographics of the people that actually took the survey. So as we get ready to have a discussion, you'll understand the makeup of the people in the survey. Then we'll go through, we'll talk about the high-level metrics, some of the city performance, the gap analysis, resident priorities, and we'll end with the benchmarking conversation. But we'll pause throughout to be able to take any questions. Does that sound like a okay approach to everyone?
Sounds good.
All right, excellent. Next slide, Naomi. All right, so to kick us off, before I turn it over to Ernie, just in terms of some history, like I said, we've been conducting this survey every year since 2000. Prior to 2023, this was done biannually, and now we do this annually. And it really does provide a great snapshot for us to keep an eye on what's happening in the community, to be able to see emerging trends. And now,
Mayor,
Councillor Nolan?
can I just, what page are we, is this actually in the, if you could just point us to what page we're at, because I couldn't find it easily.
I'm not sure what you have in your pack. Would you like a print copy
It
of
is,
the?
through Mayor Siddiqui, it is at the very back, Counselor Nolan. So if you get to the back page, it's like slide 32. So if you just flip up till you get to page 1. It is hard to find, though.
Got it, thank you.
Great. So the other element that we have added that we partner with Polco on is our national benchmarking. So at the end, I'll be able to talk about that. And what that really allows us to do is to see how our results compare nationally. And this year, based on feedback we received in the past, we added a new benchmarking, which is for similar sized communities. So cities in their database that are between 100 and 150,000. So Ernie, I'll turn it over to you if you want to talk a little bit about the methodology and then walk us through the demographic breakdown. And when you need a slide advanced, just say next slide and Naomi will advance it.
Okay, thank you, Lee. Yeah, just real quickly, the sampling frame was a random probability sample, which is a probability proportionate to size sample. What that is it allows for units in the city. The bigger the unit in the city at large, the greater the chance that that unit would be selected for the survey. I also want to remind you that we currently do about 80% of the sample as cell phone interviews. And that, of course, has changed dramatically over the years. When we first started doing this in the year 2000, it was almost entirely landline interviewing. But given the realities of 2025, about 80% of the interviews were conducted with cell phones. So that's just a quick overview of how the sample construction was done. If you move to the next slide, we can see how this random sampling technique has actually resulted in us getting a pretty good handle on several demographics in terms of them matching the reality here in the city. One of the things we do is we're careful to essentially set up a quota for gender so that we get roughly a 50-50 split between female and male, and also other identifications. As you can see, we got 1% non-binary and gender non-conforming, but what we aim for is roughly a 50-50 split on gender. And as you can see in the area of age, one of the concerns we have had over the years is to make sure we get enough respondents in the 18 to 24-year-old category. And believe it or not, while they are disproportionately users of cell phones, it's still difficult to get them to agree to do a survey on the phone. So we're careful to set up a quota system that gets us roughly in the ballpark of what the population is in the city for 18 to 24-year-olds. And you can see we have it at 14% there. Next slide. Another couple of demographics are length of residency. And as you can see, the top response is 10 to 20 years, but taken together, the 10 and above years is pretty much the norm that we've seen in past surveys as well. Ownership versus rental is a very important demographic to make sure we have that pinned to what the reality is in the city, and that's just about the right proportion based on recent data. About 6 in 10 residents of the city are renters, and just under 4 in 10 are home owners. So we match that pretty well to the reality as well in the survey. To the next slide. We wanted to know how many children under the age of 18 were living in a household, and as you can see, it's only about 20%, which is holding pretty steady from past surveys. 20% who say yes, they have a child under the age of 18 living in the household. Ethnicity, which is a self-identifying characteristic, a self-identifying variable. It's not that we controlled for this, as we asked people what their ethnicity was. So we read them a list of ethnicities and asked them which one came closest to describing their ethnicity. And as you can see, we have about 6 in 10, 58% who say they are white or Caucasian, 16% Asian or East Indian, 14% Black African American, and 11% Hispanic, and you can see the other categories as well. These pretty much match the reality as well of the city. We also ask people their household income. We make this the very last question in the survey so that people aren't refusing at a high level. And as you can see, as in the past, the city has an extremely high income breakdown. A third of the interviews were among people earning household incomes of $125,000 or more. If we continue on to the next one. The next slide, please. We also asked people their employment status. And as you can see, a little over half, 53% are employed full-time, another 9% part-time, 7% student, 19% retired, and non-employed about 7%. We also added a question this time on zip code because we want to make sure we're getting roughly the right proportion of people in the right areas of the city. We do have another question that reads people a list of neighborhoods in the city and asks them which neighborhood best represents the one they live in. And that pretty much was a good enough measure of region, if you will, within the city, but we wanted to be a little finer, and so we added a zip code question. And the combination of those two, I think, pretty well captures the regional breakdown within the city. So if there were any questions on demographics, I'd be happy to answer them.
We do have some questions. I will just say that Councillor Zusi is on the line, if you want to call her roll.
Councillor Zusi? Councillor Zusi?
She'll hopefully chime in when she
Just
can. Lee?
quickly before questions, Ernie, one item that we didn't cover is could you just briefly describe the margin of error and how people should be thinking about that?
Yes. The margin of error is plus or minus 4.9%. So as we're moving through the data, you can think of it as basically plus or minus 5%. And what that means is that when you conduct 100 such surveys using this sampling frame, 95 of them will get you results that fall within plus or minus 5% of a given percentage. And that's sort of a worst case scenario. When a question is 50-50, say, then the margin of error is about plus or minus 5%. As you get closer to unanimity, 60-40, 70-30, that margin of error actually gets better and gets lower, and you can be more confident of responses that have those higher breaks in terms of 60, 40, 70, 30. But as a worst case scenario, you can think of plus or minus 4.9% on 400 interviews across the city. Thank you, Lee. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that.
We'll go to Councillor Nolan and then Councillor McGovern.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm only asking questions on this, on the demographical go information. Really appreciate the breakdown. I do have a question on there seems to be two that are out of line with our city. One is that students are listed as 7% of the respondents, and they are 24% of our city. So that's a very clear difference between what our city actually is and not. And I've always suggested whenever we do this, we actually should have at least the whole information and then students separate and then without students, just because they're a very different type of resident. And the other thing is that it was noted that 32% of the respondents had a salary of $125,000 or more. That is actually far less than the median salary in Cambridge, which is $126,000. So if it was actually spread amongst the actual population, you would have expected that number to be closer to 50%. So I'm just curious as to whether there's any reason for those two differences from our current population. Not the others seem pretty close. The ethnicity, the children, any children under 18. I think the age breakdown is pretty similar, but I do think those two merit some questioning.
Again, this is household income that we're asking about, and it's a self-reporting question. So there's kind of very little we can do to ameliorate that, but I believe from the stats I've seen from the census that pretty closely matches. I mean, it might be a little bit off, but it pretty closely matches what the household income is for the city, and it's everyone in the household, not just the individual respondent.
Ernie, can you? That's
Councillor
what I'm
Nolan?
talking. Yeah, we are talking median income. Median household income is $126,000, and median family income is $167,000. My point was that group is therefore underrepresented in the survey according to the statistics. If what you're saying is this is household income.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, and of course we have to take into account that 16% refused to answer. So, it's hard to know where those would actually be distributed across the actual categories. But. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. In terms of the student question, it may be that they're self-reporting in other categories. Perhaps employed full-time, employed, or probably employed part-time. Or they may have refused. So it's hard to say in a self-reporting question again like that how we can get to that. It seems to me that we might take some heart in the fact that we got in the age category, the 18 to 24 age category, which would be where most students would be. We were in the 14% range, but it's difficult to be 100% accurate when they're self-reporting questions. But I hear what you're saying about both of those.
Councillor Nolan?
Yeah, thank you. That's a pretty dramatic difference, 7% versus 24%. So I just think let's all think about if there's anything that we might want to consider as we review this.
Councillor McGovern and then Councillor Sabrina Wheeler.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you. I was going to ask a question about the income as well. $125,000 and over is a pretty big range, right? If you're a family of four earning $125,000 in Cambridge, your experience with the city might be very different than if you're a family of four that earns $500,000 a year. So we may want to break that down further in the future. And similarly, I don't see anything here. We ask if there are children under the age of 18, but we talk about family size, but we don't actually ask family size.
That's correct. We do not.
So,
Yep.
Again, the experience of, if I am a single parent that has a 17-year-old and I earn $125,000 a year, I might experience the city differently than if it's a family of six, and so those might be important questions to dig into a little bit. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
I think that's a good point. In the future, we could break down that category even further, the highest category, and make some finer breakdowns over 125,000. I think that's a good idea. We can easily do that in the next survey.
Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Thanks. I just want to ask a question on slide 5, which had the age breakdown categories. I was interested to see that there were twice as many people between the age of 65 to 74 as there were between 35 to 44. Those are both 9-year age categories. Expected, maybe we'd have a few more people 65 to 74 than 35 to 44, given that 35 to 44 is like some of the prime years to have kids. Cambridge is incredibly expensive. Folks are moving out when they have kids, especially if they have multiple kids. I was a little surprised it's twice as many folks, given that it's the same age range. Just wondering if we really think that's right. There's twice as many people 65 to 74 as there are 35 to 44 in Cambridge, and if you have any insight on what that is, anything else that comes in here, how that compares to other cities, could speak to that a little more.
I believe these numbers are very close to the census data that we were using to benchmark the sample. But I don't know, Lee, if you have any other information about that.
I don't have the exact one on me, but I can definitely get it from community development and share it with you. I think the experience we've seen across all surveys is you'll never get every category matching exactly every demographic in the city. And that's why things will shift, but as long as we're getting within the range, we know it's a fairly representative sort of sample. But I think the types of questions from family size to age, and income are important things, and is one of the reasons why we wanted to move this discussion up front, because it is important to think about who's taking the survey, and as we talk about the results that we're talking in aggregate, but how we start thinking about what it means for different parts of our population, because how we view our city, how we view our services looks differently for different people at different times.
Councilor Sabrina.
That makes sense. Yeah, I guess I was trying to get at, was curious if people aged 35 to 44 are just less likely to fill out surveys because they're super busy with their jobs and kids and stuff. Sounds like that's not the case. We think this is representative. That's super interesting. The one point I'd ask, just like as you're going through this, I'm really curious of how this compares to other cities. If there's anything where Cambridge is a real outlier when you're doing this work, surveying other cities, if it looks totally different than Cambridge. Curious to hear that, if you can add some of that color as you're going through this. I yield back.
Sure. I know that Lee's going to be talking about the Polco comparisons across the country, which are a more formal one, but I can give you sort of an ad hoc assessment. The one thing that jumps out at me continually in Cambridge surveys compared to other ones in Massachusetts and elsewhere around the country that I do is the level of favorability or the rating, the excellent rating in terms of overall government services. It's quite high. As we'll get to in a minute, I think you'll see that this year it was, I think, the second highest in the survey program's history in terms of that benchmark question. So to me, that's what stands out always. I think I've mentioned this to Lee several times. You should feel very lucky in terms of that question, because other municipalities in Massachusetts don't come close, and other ones that are similar, frankly, to you, both demographically and regionally, that are close by you, don't do as well as you have done pretty consistently over time. There have been ups and downs on the favorability question, but over the last several surveys, it's been quite strong, quite positive.
We have a few more questions, Ernie. And just so we know, do you know, I think your camera is off. So if you wanted it to be on, we'd love to see you, but not. Okay. I just wanted to let you know that we're not seeing you. So we have Councillor Zusi who wanted a question, and then Councillor Al-Zubi.
Hi there. And first of all, let me say I'm embarrassed that I'm not there. I thought this meeting was later today. I did read the survey, though, and I thought the results reflected basically what we've thought overall. I understand that it was a random survey of 400 residents, and I think you did a pretty great job of getting a representative response. I did note that it's a little heavy on East Cambridge, 12%, the Port, 13%, and then North Cambridge, 13%. Anyway, and just another idea, this comes from my aide. She had asked whether you could ask for neighborhood-specific information, or there would be any way to even break down neighborhoods more specifically to reference our 13 different neighborhoods. And I realize that may not be possible because I know you want to be able to align the local Cambridge survey with the national survey so that we have real benchmarks with what people are thinking nationally. Thank you. I yield.
Sure, we'll take any suggestions in terms of how we can better define those areas. Again, we read the neighborhoods to people and ask them which one best represents where they live. And of course, different people think of different identifications in terms of where they live. And they may be on the border of certain two neighborhoods and pick one over the other. But, again, it's a self-reported question, but we'd be happy to take suggestions to make those neighborhoods more specific or break them down further. It's already a pretty long list, but we'd be happy to do that to make a finer breakdown.
Yeah, I wish
Councilor
there was.
Zusi?
Yeah, it would have been nice. And again, there's so many different things that you're trying to measure here. You want diversity in economic group, age group. I mean, and in so many different, there's so many different strata. So I feel like you got a pretty broad spread range from this random survey of 400 residents. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Zubi.
Thank you for the work that you're doing on this. I had two questions. One, could you quickly clarify, when you were surveying people on the income piece, was that a question in particular to individual or family income, household income?
It's total household income.
Total household income.
Yep.
I think it'd be also interesting, just relative to the prior data too, on whether or not they have children under the age of 18 living in their space, while we consider the data on the income
Councilor
aspect.
Zubi, sorry, can you just pull the mic closer to you, please?
Yeah,
Thank you.
sorry.
Yep, thanks.
Yeah, it'd just be interesting to note the piece on the 79% not having children under the age of 18 as we approach understanding the income piece. Also, just in general, what was the source for getting access to the phone numbers?
The landline phones were just a randomization of numbers off of the routes that are affiliated with Cambridge. The cell phone data was purchased from a vendor to make sure we had a balance between landline and cell phones.
And is there a
As I
break?
mentioned-
Yes,
Pardon?
sorry. Go ahead.
And as I mentioned, that cell phone component has been growing and growing and growing over the years to the point where it's about 80% of the sample now.
And you just answered my follow-up. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next section.
Great. Thank you. So in this next section, we're going to talk about the high-level metrics and some of the city-specific data. I may pause halfway through this before we go into the specifics to see if there's any questions, and then we'll move on. So next slide. So overall, we start the survey each year with a suite of really high-level benchmark questions. I consider these some of our super metrics that we tend to look at because they're just broad and general and give us a general sense about how people are feeling about the city. And overall, people remain really highly rated and they feel very good about the city. This is something that we've seen over the years, and in some cases we have some standouts in terms of the highest levels. As you look at this, you can really group stuff into a few different ways. The darkest blue colors, those are your excellent and goods, those are your positives. The lighter blue colors, those are the negative sides, the fair and poor. And what you can do is you can really look at your overall positive. So if we look at Cambridge as a place to live, 87% of folks are giving us as a really high rating. That's phenomenal. And you look at the excellent rated, almost half of their sponsors are rating it as excellent. And then at the same time, we start to look at some of our trends over time. If you look inside the detailed report, you'll see that people move between excellent and good. So some years we have the excellent rated a little higher. This is one of those questions that we've seen a slight decline in the excellent rating, but they're staying within the positives. And that's a very good thing. Where we want to really watch over time is when we have people moving from the good category down into the fair or the poor categories. Welcoming to all races and ethnicities and cultures and identities, these have remained relatively high. One area that is down slightly is your neighborhood as a place to live. And we're seeing Cambridge as a safe place to live up over the previous results. As we move on to the next little set, I want to highlight, next slide please, these last three, because these start to relate to the city performance. The first one, overall performance of city government. In terms of the excellent rating, the 22%, this one is at the highest level that it's been throughout the survey, only matching, I believe it was in 2023, when this number was just as high. So overall, people are feeling really good about the overall performance of city government. Same thing in terms of positive ratings about how we are doing in terms of welcoming involvement of our residents. And the last question on the overall direction the city has taken. This is a new question that we added this year. And as you can see, it's gained really high ratings in terms of 65% of folks saying excellent or good in terms of the overall direction of the city. There's a few new questions that we've added in this survey, and the approach we've been taking is as we add questions, we want to make sure that they're benchmarkable against Polco. So we'll talk about this a little later on. Next slide. To the discussion that we were having on demographics, we can see we get really high remarks for overall performance of city government, but it's not seen equally across different demographics, right? So in this survey, the excellent ratings tended to be more from men and younger adults, residents of West Cambridge, residents who had shorter tenures, and our Asian, East Indian, Black, African American residents. The poorer ratings in terms of the fair and the poor were for households with incomes under 50,000, Hispanic, those with some college education, longer-term residents and retirees, and residents of the Port neighborhood. So as we go through, today we'll mostly talk about the survey results in aggregate, but we do go through and try to look at the results and see where are there statistical differences between different populations, between different demographics, so that we can start to tease out and be like, what does that mean? So I think your conversation about demographics really highlight into here that we should be looking at all the results with a critical eye.
Lee, can I jump in for a second?
Certainly.
I just think this slide is particularly instructive because it's so visual. If you go back now to the very first survey I did for the city in November of 2000, that total number of positivity and overall performance of city government was at 51%. It was a 50-50 split, and now it's at 70%. So it gives you a sense of how far the city has gone in terms of how residents view the overall performance of the city. It was basically 50-50 back then. 25 years later, it's 70-30. So I just wanted to throw that perspective in.
Great. Thank you, Ernie. Next slide. Another question that I think is really important for us to get a sense of how residents are feeling about the city. We called these a few surveys ago, sort of these measures about pride, like how likely is someone to recommend to someone living in Cambridge? And then also, what is the likelihood of them remaining here for the next 5 years? And as you can see, things have remained very stable on these questions. We first started asking it in 2023, and I think as we move forward, these are two really important questions to monitor as we think about broader trends taking place in the Commonwealth, we think about the economic realities. More generally, these will give us a sense, I think, of how residents are feeling about the city. It can give indications in terms of the ability to stay here. So these are two other really important questions. So I think before I go into department-specific data, are there any questions on any of the general metrics that we've talked about?
Councillor Al-Zubi?
Yeah, just on the remaining piece, what was what was the question offered when surveying residents on that? Was it more so like, do you want to plan to remain in Cambridge, or if you see yourself able to continue to plan to stay in Cambridge? I think that just that subtle difference can really isolate whether or not people can afford to live here. So I'm curious.
This is on the remaining?
Yeah.
The exact question, the broader one was, please tell me how likely you'd be to do each of the following. And then the question was, remain in Cambridge for the next 5 years.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Ernie.
and I was going to say the scale was very likely, somewhat unlikely, and very unlikely, as you can see on the chart.
Please, Councillor Flaherty.
Hi, Ernie. I just have one question. I probably should wait to the end, but was there any cross-tabulation done on any of these questions?
Yes, there's a full set of crosstabs that look at each question arrayed by both demographic and substantive questions as well. So you can look at each question in the survey and see how the demographics broke down. That's what Lee was referring to in that previous slide, where he went through the people who gave excellent ratings versus fair ratings. So yes, it's available on every single question in the survey.
Thanks.
Yep.
Councillor Nolan.
Thanks. I think one way to get it, perhaps, if someone thought they were leaving, it could be a range of reasons. It could be their family somewhere else. It could be they can't afford to live here. It could be something else. And I think doing a little bit of the crosstabs would say something. It would also, particularly on the affordability, it might be interesting to know if they're in a subsidized place, then they're more likely to be able to stay, as opposed to if they're in a place that is not subsidized or they feel like they can't do that. But that we don't, I think, have the data for. But certainly by age, there's a lot of people who may move out based on the age. And as Councilor Sabrina-Wheeler said, it might be because you have kids and you go somewhere, or if you're 70 years old and you're going into some kind of assisted living or senior community. So at some point, maybe we should take a look at that.
Lee?
Yeah, I just was going to
go ahead.
There's so much discussion about people fleeing Massachusetts these days, economic reasons. The fact that you get, 82% saying that they plan in the next 5 years on staying in Cambridge, I think is pretty impressive.
All right. Next slide, Naomi. So now the next few slides will really talk a little bit about how people are viewing specific city services. And as you can see, overall, the results are very good with, a couple really great standouts here. I mean, the ratings for our libraries, our fire department, and our garbage, recycling, and compost pickup are really, really incredibly high. And then as you move down the categories, that dark blue and then the next darkest shade of the blue, you can see those positive ratings really are great across them. Generally, when I look at these, the one that I also want to look at is sort of that poor rating. And most of these, it's a small margin. It's a little bit larger on the sidewalk maintenance piece, and this is one that we'll track over time, but later on we'll see as people rate transportation modes of getting around, the walking is highly rated. So, if you think about the amount of construction and the investments that the city is making in sort of improving the infrastructure in the city, sometimes my theory would be this can be tied to the construction that's going on, but this is the type of stuff that you'll want to track over time. Next slide. So this is a new question that we asked this year. In previous surveys, we've never had a question asking about customer service. And what we did is we asked, in terms of the last engagement that they had with the city, how would they rate the overall customer service provided by the employees? And it's, as you can see, 76% gave a positive rating, with a little over a quarter giving an excellent rating. If you go to the next slide, you'll see the actual breakdown of the departments that people reported. So the next question was, could you share which department it was? And the lion's share obviously was traffic, parking, and transportation, which I should be calling the Department of Transportation now. I realized after I put this together the name changed, so sorry to the team there. Followed by Public Works, our police department, the library, and then the city clerk's office sitting at the top of these. So I think this is going to be a great question to sort of track over time, and what value I see in questions like these. Sometimes we are so immersed in the emails that are coming in, you don't get a clear sense of how more broadly people are thinking about their interactions with the city. So this is a nice question that we've added, and it will also be benchmarked nationally.
Lee, could I just jump in? I wanted to point out that this list was not read to people. We said, thinking of the last issue, overall customer service by the City of Cambridge employees, what specific city department did you have your last interaction with? And we did not read the list. So I think it's all the more indicative of the reality here that people were responding to us in their own words, and we were classifying them into the three codes that we had there. So makes it even more interesting, I think.
We have one clarifying question. Councillor Nolan.
Yeah, clarifying, it looks like on this, just 3% said they had no interaction. Does that mean the other 397 or 390 or so people actually had an interaction, or was the N different?
I see what you're saying. On the previous question, it was 7% don't know. Is that what you're saying? I'm sorry, could you clarify the question?
Yes, on the list of departments, it says no interaction, 3%. So presumably to me, that would mean that about 388 or so of the respondents to this 400 people who responded actually had an interaction with city staff.
Yes, that's correct. But there was also a 4% don't know, so it's hard to, it's interesting that the 4% don't know plus the 3% no interaction kind of equals the don't know on the previous question about the specific question about customer service. So you're right, though. Yeah, it's about that number of people out of the 400.
City Manager?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. I think just the thing that did stand out to us as we were reviewing this is how high, like a quarter of folks were thinking about traffic, parking, and transportation. And those tend to be the harder interactions because it's mostly tickets and appeals. And so I think this did feel like somewhat of a positive result that we had 76% of people saying excellent or good customer service, even when almost more than a quarter of those were essentially talking to transportation.
Mm-hmm.
Lee?
Good job, transportation.
That's the last slide in this section. I don't know if there's any other questions on any of these. If not, we can move on.
Any questions on this section before we go to the gap analysis? Please go ahead.
Great. Naomi, if you could move ahead one more. So Ernie's going to walk us through a gap analysis. This is a tool that we added in 2023, which really asks a series of questions and asks people to rate the same question on both the importance and then the performance. And then Ernie conducts a bunch of investigation for us to figure out what that difference is. So Ernie, do you want to walk us through this section?
Sure. Thanks, Lee. And you can see the categories along the right-hand side there. Those are the 13 categories. Essentially, as Lee said, what we do, we have a scale where we ask people to rate each of those in terms of how important they are to them, and then read that list again and say, okay, now how well does the city perform on those same 13 issues? So if you could go to the next slide. Then what we do is we take the okay, let's look first at what residents value most. And this is rank ordered in terms of extremely important. And you can see that market housing that is affordable is the most important. Safe streets and neighborhoods, next. Economic health, including jobs and workforce development. Affordable housing that is subsidized or income restricted, for low and moderate income people. And the quality of transportation. And you can see the cascading numbers as we go down the full list. So that was the level of importance. And again, we did this on a 5-point scale. And the next slide shows how residents think the city performed on those same 13 variables. And the top one here is opportunity to attend cultural, arts, and music activities, the quality of open space, safe streets and neighborhoods, and the quality of the transportation system. Stepping back more globally, what this technique does is it allows you to, given the finite amount of resources the city has to spend on key issues, this can tell you where residents think the most improvement is needed. And so you can spend those resources in the areas that matter most to city residents. What we do essentially is take the mean scores for all of these, the importance and performance ratings, and calculate a gap analysis that shows, if you could show the next slide, a gap analysis that shows exactly where the public residents fall on each of these issues. Now, this is a little confusing, this scale, but what it represents is the higher the number you see, the greater attention that issue needs, because the ratio is higher between importance and performance. So at the very bottom there, you see affordable market housing at 1.89. So that's the top gap between essentially expectations and performance. That's the biggest problematic area. Next is affordable housing, subsidized housing at 1.36. And you can see all the other ones are below 1. So it's pretty clear that disproportionately housing-related issues are the ones that people are telling you need to perform better on. And that's not surprising given some of the other results in the survey that we'll probably get to in a few minutes. At the top of the range, you actually have a minus 0.12, which is actually a positive rating for education, cultural, and arts events. So what that would say to me is that you're already doing very well there. People expect it, but you're delivering. So there's no need to disproportionately, offer more funding for those particular issues. And you can see the range of issues down the list there on the left-hand side. But again, I think it's clear the contrast between the two bottom ones, which are well over 1.0, and everything else, which is below 1. So if there are any questions about the gap, it's a little confusing, but I think what we tried to do a few years ago was dive a little deeper into these issues and try to ascertain what exactly people thought was important and how they rated the city on those particular issues. So this is the result of it. We've been doing it for 2 or 3 years, and I think, essentially the same results have turned up all 3 years, I believe. Certainly the housing issues have percolated to the top in each of those gap analyses. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions on this piece, Councilor Nolan?
Just super quick, what's the algorithm that leads to the gap number?
It's basically subtracting one mean score from the other. It's pretty simple.
Councilor Nolan?
Yep, and the mean score of the prior, taking out the don't knows?
Yes, taking out the don't knows, correct.
Yep,
for those scales.
Thanks.
Sure.
Councilor Zubi?
How was the decision made to survey the language for it to be market housing that is affordable? That feels a little misleading, and it feels like it puts us under this flawed premise on market rate housing and affordability. So could you walk me through the language between market housing that is affordable and then the affordable housing with the parentheses?
I'm happy to grab this one, Ernie. So this bank of questions comes from the National Community Survey. So Polco, who previously was done through the ICMA, which is the International City and County Managers Association, they do a national community survey, and these are the exact questions that they ask, and this allows us to benchmark against communities across the nation. So that's what this suite of questions came from.
Through you, Mayor Siddiqui, I think this was, I feel like we included this, was this maybe a year ago or 2 years ago, but I think in
2023.
2023. So I think in prior years, we only really talked about affordable housing, but we didn't actually think about whether that meant low-income restricted affordable housing, so formal affordable housing, subsidized housing that we are investing in through the Affordable Housing Trust, or whether we're thinking about essentially the broader sense of, is it affordable to live in the city? And so I think we've split that out to try and call out that when residents are saying you have to work on housing, are they asking for more subsidized housing that you need to income qualify for, or are they saying that the overall cost of housing for anybody is too high? So I think that's it's been interesting to see, you know, both of those have tended to be valued very, very highly. I think this is actually the first year we've seen a little bit of divergence between the two in this survey, and I think I'd have to go back and look, but I feel like in the prior survey, there wasn't as much of a differentiation.
I have Councillor Azim.
Just on that question, I was just going to say a fun fact, which is that if you look at surveys that are done across the Commonwealth, the ratio of the two, I would take a slightly different determination of, like, I think that there's always been a gap there, but the gap is most stark in places where less people qualify for affordable housing. Like, I think another way to read it is like, I want the housing that I would qualify for to be more affordable. And especially in a higher income community, it makes sense that people feel like they necessarily would not qualify for lower and middle income. But actually, this number is more supportive of affordable housing than you see in other communities. Like Newton's numbers, I'm actually decently familiar with, where I think that it's much lower as compared to affordable market rate housing.
I think we can move on.
Great. And a question that may come up in terms of, like, what do we do with information like this? Obviously, some of these are bigger and broader sort of trends, but as I look at something like that, informing residents, right? That is something that has shown up. What our teams have been doing is we conducted follow-up research with Ernie in terms of looking and taking a deeper dive into communications and engagement in the city. So we try to look at the survey results that we're getting and then figuring out how to turn them into actions. So the point of bringing that up is these are just not surveys we conduct every year. You have a conversation, you put it on a shelf. It's providing us with actionable results. So with that, Naomi, next slide, and then next slide again. So one of the questions, and this is the only open-ended question that is in the survey, that we ask questions to talk about the single most important priority they think we should be working on in the next 2 years, and it's in their own words. So Ernie's team, they go through, they record everything, and then they categorize it. And to our conversation, this was the question that always came up and really looked at affordable housing. And I think what this really gets at, because you have that mix of people talking about what we refer to as affordable housing when we're thinking about it, but then you have housing affordability. You have all the categories coming together as we look at it, and you can see the results from this year match exactly last year, and this is always sitting at the top. It's the next categories that tend to shuffle themselves year to year. In this survey, cost of living and the economy and jobs is surfacing as the number 2 issue, and then transportation. And Ernie, I didn't get a chance to ask you before, have you seen politics before in our survey? That one doesn't really jump out to me as something that has been as the single most important issue that has come up. That's a little different than I've seen in the past.
Yeah, no, I agree, Lee. I don't recall it showing up certainly not in the top 4. You know, it may have been in the bottom 2 or 3 in the past, but not that high up on the list. And as you can see, there is no trend data there from our recent surveys anyway, from going back to 2023.
Great. All right, next slide. So another series of questions that we ask is related to the level of activity for certain types of questions. One we've had in, I think, since 2020 is, have they ridden a bike in the city? This has been one that we've asked over the years. This year, we see a drop in the high-end frequency, but there is a lot of variability survey to survey across these. A new question we added this year was really around whether or not people have volunteered time. And as you can see, almost 50% of our population at some point has volunteered at least once or twice. And then you can see 11% being in the 13 to 26 to 26 plus range. This is a question that we saw as a little bit of a gap in our survey because I think it gets to how engaged our community is and opportunities not only for nonprofits, but as we think about recruiting for boards and commissions, having a sense of how likely someone is to volunteer is important. The next two are related to city council activity. We have seen a little bit of a softening from the previous few surveys, but that, in my opinion, is sort of normal. I bet you if we went back and tracked it against the types of initiatives that are before the council, that will trigger those types of people. But what you'll also see in the national benchmarks is the engagement with our city council eclipses all the benchmarking data, which is really pretty positive. Yeah, go ahead.
Jump in just to give that perspective, that particular question. The first survey we did for you back in November of 2000, the percentage of people who said they never attend a city council meeting was 83%, and it's 64% now. So that's a pretty considerable drop. So just for perspective, long-term perspective.
Okay. Any questions on this section?
Any questions on this? Yes, Councillor Flaherty and then Councillor Al-Zubi.
So Ernie, how do I find the crosstabs in response to these categories?
They're not in the report itself because it's, as you can imagine, it's a huge document. So.
Right. Okay.
Lee,
I can share it with the council, Ernie.
okay, yeah, I think Lee has it, so.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Councillor Al-Zubi?
I'm curious if you explored accessibility as it compares to attendance to city council meetings. Like, was there any follow-up to ask if they knew how to access the meetings or how to approach that?
No, we did not ask that. We did not do a follow-up, no.
Okay.
Lee?
Nope. Any other questions on this section?
I don't see any.
Thank you for that suggestion, Councilor Al-Zubi. That's an interesting follow-up one to see if we can take a deeper dive in a future survey. Next slide. All right, so in this section, the last group of questions that we've asked for the past few years are around transportation. And if you go to the next slide, one of the questions that we really look at is like how people are getting around and the ease of it. And what I have here is the last 3 surveys worth of results. And, you know, we can really see that consistently people are rating getting around the city by foot is the easiest way of getting around, and obviously driving is the more challenging out of the others. This year, we've seen an increase in ratings related to getting around by taxi and ride hail, but also you can see a really big shift in the public transportation, and this makes sense. If the result was different, it would give me pause because as we think about 23 and 24, you had the red line issues that were going on, people rating it lower. That is starting to resolve. So this change actually makes sense to me. But overall, we can see there is a degree of stability around some of these issues, but the trends have been shifting. I don't know if, Ernie, you have any other insights into any of these particular categories.
No, I would just confirm what you just said. That was a surprising jump to me because if you look at the trend going back to 2023, there was a steady increase from 16% to 19 to 24, which does tend to argue for the resolution of those red line issues and people recognizing that and being willing to take that option.
Great. Next slide. Another question we ask people is for the single most important option for the city to focus on improving in the next few years. This year, we are seeing, as you can see here, a pretty big spike in parking. compared to other years. You know, here again, you've seen the public transportation starting to come down. Bicycle infrastructure still remains strong. Same thing with pedestrian infrastructure. And we've seen a decrease in both the roadway and the electric vehicle. But in some ways, some of this, I think, tracks a little bit with more public conversations that we've been hearing. But again, it gives you an interesting snapshot and trend to see how what people are feeling the focus should be for the next couple of years is. And I don't know if there's any questions on this section.
Yes, we do have one, too. We'll go to Councilor Azim and then Councilor McGovern.
I was going to say, I was talking here with my fellow Councilor Flaherty here, that it's kind of funny how it plays out, where we see maybe less frequent biking per the other stat, but then here, bicycle infrastructure has gone up 3 years in a row to now 18%. And so maybe people are biking a little less frequently, but the infrastructure is more important to them. Funny how that works.
Councilor McGovern?
Just when you, through you, Madam Mayor, to Lee, when you say the most important topics for improving over the next few years, you're talking, this is specifically about transportation.
Correct.
Just making it clear, because on the other slide, parking was actually pretty low in terms of level of importance on the list of things for us to work on. So just to, for the record, we're talking just when it comes to transportation.
Yeah, this section specifically related to transportation. You know, I'd say as we think about the 2026 survey, there are two areas for us to, I think, look at. Making sure that on the transportation front, we're still asking the right types of questions that we can ask. One of the advantages of going to a yearly is we can start to toggle questions in between. Not every question necessarily needs to be asked every year, because if you're doing an intervention, it takes a little bit longer. And then it's the questions related to departments where we had like police, fire, libraries. Those, I think we may want to move those onto a biennial sort of sequencing, which will allow us to add more questions into the survey, because one of the challenges that we have is we are at the absolute maximum in terms of the time and the number of questions. So we want to balance questions we're taking out, questions we're putting in, making sure they're actionable to us, and where possible, the questions we're adding, we can benchmark them when appropriate.
Councilor McGovern?
I just thought of one last thing. Why did we choose to do the deeper dive into transportation when housing is always, you know, the highest, you know, by far? Why aren't we doing a deeper dive into housing questions to get to, you know, some of those questions that Councilor Zuby raised about affordability and
Yeah, that's a great question. These questions started, it was in the middle of COVID. There was a lot of the discussions going around the CSO, then city manager, DePasquale, and the teams, they got added in. And then as we've been tinkering with and modifying the survey, we've kept things a slow sort of change. So that's why those have gone in. So I think as we think about questions that potentially come out, if there are deeper and appropriate questions that we can ask in the survey that people can answer. I think one of the challenges that we want to balance with this type of survey is asking questions that everyone's going to be able to answer, right? Because the one thing you don't want to do is ask a question and then have 30% be, I don't know. It doesn't give you as good. So it's like figuring out that level, but much like we did with the communications follow-up survey, we could take a deeper dive into it because you had more time, shorter question sort of frames, and it allows for a more robust discussion. So I think as we look into 2026, if there's deeper questions that will be useful to the council and to city staff, that's totally the purpose of doing these surveys, because we want to make sure that what we're asking is useful, you can use it, and it helps us better understand our community.
Yeah, we have Councilor, I think, Nolan, and then Al-Zubi.
Thank you. Right, it's always going to be a challenge to figure out what questions to ask, because of course I think each of us can probably think of 7 questions we could ask and add to it. On this one, I think what's particularly striking to me is a couple things. One, it did ask for the single most important option, so someone was only allowed to do one. so that there's a forced choice between this. So in any given year, it may be, oh, I want, I'm a pedestrian and I had something, so that's going to be my number one, or as a pedestrian, or as a cyclist, or as a electric vehicle charger, if we don't have as many. It is striking, though, that even though it went down, public transportation, like bus or subway, is still by far the highest and priority for people, with 37%, and the next highest would be parking at 24, and then bicycle infrastructure at 18. So it's still, again, even though it went down, that many people said this is the single most important thing, which ties in with, I think, the work that we're trying to do. But interpreting these questions and making sure that we are looking both at the trends over time and also the actual raw numbers make sense. And I agree, it would be interesting to see on a couple of these different issues a little more deeper dive. And yet, this is a really good, this is one we've heard time and time and time again. We spend an enormous amount of time as a city on roadways, on bike infrastructure, so it's really important for us to understand this is something of a measure of how we're doing. So thanks.
Councilor Zubi?
I think interesting to Burhan's point too, in the ease of getting around the city, that the electric bicycle or scooter option went down as well, and how we look at that. I'm a little curious because we saw sidewalk maintenance be a larger portion. I'm curious, did you all explore like the breakdown on the on-foot aspect with the ease of getting around based on weather by any chance, if people would change their minds?
By weather?
Yeah, like I would imagine, because sidewalk maintenance got the biggest chunk, and yet it got the greatest amount on the ease of getting around. I'm just fascinated by that difference.
Ernie, I think that's a little too detailed on this survey. We don't.
Yeah, I don't think we'd be able to get at that even through the crosstabs. But it is an interesting point. I think the reason, and I'm just speculating here, that the bicycle infrastructure number went up and the riding of bicycles went down is maybe that's one of the reasons that the bicycle riding went down, is because they're unhappy with the infrastructure and they want the city to pay more attention to it. That's just my seat of the pants assessment of that.
Councilor Flaherty?
No, I don't want to belabor it, Ernie, but is it an invalid assumption to conclude that since only 7% of the respondents were students, and we know that they comprise more than 20% of our population, and we assume, I guess, that students most likely don't drive, that the actual number that parking is the most important option for the city to focus on at 24% is actually higher than that? Did I explain that correctly?
It's possible. Again, that's something that it's impossible to get at from the data as it stands. But yeah, I think that's a logical assumption. That could very well be that that the actual number is higher given the student numbers.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
Mayor Siddiqui, just one quick comment. So, it's interesting because we're looking at public transportation went down as the single most area to focus on. It's also an area that saw a significant improvement because of the red line improvement. So I think these sort of tie in terms of people still think the transit and buses are super important, but in terms of being the single most, and so then you have those percentage points that can go to other modes. So it is just an interesting one to tie those together, because I think it's like the transit has improved so much and people feel like the T is doing a much better job, and so it is not coming out as high to be the number one issue for transportation, and so that 9 percentage points could then sort of float out to those other areas.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? All right. Naomi, next slide. Next slide. So the last section that we have, we're going to talk about the national benchmarks. So the national benchmarks come from a firm called Polco, and they have a database of more than 400 communities throughout the U.S. that they benchmark against. These are communities of all different sizes. So one of the additions that we did this year is we added a second benchmarking set, which is for similar sized cities. So the similar size city for us is by population. So for cities that they have in their database that are between 100,000 and 150,000. So I think that gets us a little bit closer and provides an interesting comparison. The way we read these, it's a little confusing. What they do is they take our total percent positives across all categories. So those are the good and excellent ratings. If there's a question that's asking about the number of times you're doing something, it's based on the higher usage, and they benchmark it against communities. We get marked as similar unless there's a 10-point difference in our scores compared to them. If there's a 10-point difference going up, they rate it as higher. If it's 10-point difference down, they rate it as lower. If there is a 20-point difference, they rate it as much higher or much lower. So that's how they do that. And what they also provide, and I didn't add it to the slides, but it's in your packet, they give you where you fall in terms of the rank and the total number of communities in each benchmark question. How they come up with that rank is still a little bit fuzzy in my mind. I've never gotten a clear description from them, so we just, I think, have to trust them in terms of they have a methodology. They figure out who's number one and who's number 352. So next slide, please. As we look at these, what I did is I only pulled the questions from the survey that had something different. So we benchmark approximately 40 questions with them. A lot of them come in as similar, but these are the ones that come in as a difference. Obviously, driving in Cambridge, this is our only one where we are either lower or much lower across all the surveys. And you have two columns here. One is related to the national and one is the peer cities. It's interesting as the first year getting this that they don't always match. So if we look about the walking, nationally, we're rated higher than just all the communities, but for our peer cities, we're ranked much higher. Similar as you think about safety, Cambridge is a place to live. We are ranked similar in terms of the national benchmark, but higher for our peer city benchmarks. If you go to the next slide, you'll see here, similar, we have some that are the same community connection, contacted a city councilor. We are much higher in both the national and the peer cities. For volunteering, our community, we're much higher on the national, but we're just higher related to our peer cities. And then finally, on the last slide, you can see that, again, we have a number of categories that are different. The one thing that I want to point out is you'll see these last ones that say importance ratings. In your packet, you'll see that POCO bunches the questions into a few different buckets. And there's a really interesting summary table on page 6 of the National Benchmark Survey where they have items that they call evaluative items, they have participation items, and then they have the important items. So sometimes you'll see related to quality of public utility and infrastructure. It can appear in two places. So that's why this last one says importance ratings, because those are the questions that fell under the importance, not under the evaluation criteria that they had. So I'm happy to take any questions regarding the benchmarking.
Councillor Nolan.
Thanks. I love having both of them. I do think it would be worth just going back and reviewing some of them, particularly on the last one, on the importance ratings. It just seems like on both the peer and national, on open space, we're actually number 1 or number 2, both nationally and for peers, and yet we're just viewed as higher, not much higher. In fact, it's stellar higher if we're number 1 or 2 out of either the 25 or 350. I think it's important to note that because this actually doesn't fairly represent some of those. That goes for the transportation system, residents, in particularly the quality of parks and even cultural and arts. It's not listed under peer cities, and yet in the packet also says we're number 1 in the peer cities. So I'm just hope that maybe we review some of this. I didn't go over every single detail, but I did notice that and wonder. I did wonder, for instance, why we're not higher on quality of parks, because I know from a couple of National League of Cities that we are doing so much more than others. So it might be worth, just so you know, I just referenced it on the larger packet where it is listed on page 5 of the National Benchmark Court, and on the peer, there's also the, that's on page 10 in the report going forward. So I hope we can correct that. That's
a great observation. I did not include anything related to rank in these slides, and on on the national benchmarks, 2 categories we rank number 1, and then on the peer city, there are 8 of the categories where we are on the number 1 ranking. And I think to your questions in terms of why we weren't rated as much higher, it comes to that 10-point difference versus the 20-point difference. So we could be ranked number 1, but there's only a 19-point difference. You're not going to be switched into the way they do their higher and much higher.
Other questions about the benchmarking?
Well, that's the end of the presentation that we have. We're happy to answer just general questions. I will say I greatly appreciate the conversation with the council, particularly not only today, but what has been growing over the past few years. I think this is an amazing resource that we have, and the more that we can leverage it, I think it's helpful, and we're always willing to take suggestions in terms of types of questions that we can have. There's a lot that goes into trying to figure out the proper way to ask them, whether or not they're the right level. We want to make sure that we're not moving a citywide survey into a push poll. I really do appreciate the support that we've gotten from the manager, and hopefully this is useful to the council.
One thing I wanted to add was I think it'd be helpful the next time we're here to kind of share how the council's input has been incorporated. I think we do a good job of doing this, and then I think some of the stuff my colleagues have mentioned, whether that's been around, Councilor McGovern's point around, the going over 125,000 and or doing more of a neighborhood breakdown or some of the other these pieces. Next time we're here, it'd be good to. I feel like I've written a list that's come out from some of the questions where we may want to do deeper follow up. So it'd be helpful to just close the loop on how we have accomplished some of that in areas where we simply we can't and why we can't. So I would look for that.
Sure, that's great feedback. I'll give you one concrete area where you've made a difference is that's adding the new benchmark for the peer cities. That's something that we heard. I also clearly heard today there's a lot of interest in the crosstabs. They are a lot to go through. I think it's like a 300 and some odd page document that Ernie has. So that is also something that I'm happy to spend some time and maybe pull out some of the key highlights. I'll share the whole thing with you and then can just send you like, here's some key areas that you want to take a look at in the crosstabs, so that way you're not sorting through everything and we can start to get you to some areas where it's helpful. And if you want in future presentations, we can spend a little bit more time talking at a disaggregated level rather than just at the aggregated level.
Great. And if counselors have more specific feedback, I think use this opportunity for that. And then I'll open it up to general comments, questions. City Manager?
Yeah, I think through you, Mayor, happy for additional notes to come through. We can always answer some by email. I think some of these may also be just methodological questions that we could clarify. I think especially on the demographics, there's always going to be, as Lee and Ernie were noting, some differences. And I think overall we're landing pretty close to, very close actually, to some of the splits that you would want to see. I do think the neighborhood one has been actually maybe the hardest, because actually if you go and ask people which neighborhood they're in, that is not always the most accurate representation, or the idea of neighborhoods sort of blending together means that we aren't always able to get that exact. But I think the broad shape of the population and how it's spread is reasonably close.
Madam Mayor, through you, I think the neighborhood question is a great example. That was always the standard that were asked. I think it was 2 years ago. We also added the zip code question because the numbers never really made sense on the neighborhood splits, and people don't always know our predefined neighborhood boundaries, and if you're on the left side of the street versus the right side of the street where you are, but you all know, for the most part, your zip code. So that was another way for us to match, and we can see that the survey is mapping across the percentage of people living within the zip code. So that's just another piece as a gut check. I think the neighborhood question is important, and it gives us another piece with the zip codes.
I have Councilor Zeman and Councilor Zusi.
Just one brief comment, and I'd love to hear a response from the survey makers as well, is that I think it'll be interesting and fun to go through the crosstabs. My understanding of polling in general is that the margin of error in crosstabs goes up dramatically. So if this is 5%, like maybe it's like a 20% margin of error or something like that. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, it varies. But I think you'll see, if you get a chance to look at the crosstabs, on the bottom of each page, there's a level of an array of significance tests, which give you even further insight into how reliable that particular crosstab is. But you're correct, because it's each crosstab is a slice of the overall sample, so it's going to be a different margin of error. But again, the significance tests at the bottom of the page, I think, is what you should pay attention to. And I'd be happy to get you, it's a little bit arcane, but I can get you kind of a cheat sheet of what each of those significance tests means for each of the crosstabs. So it'll be easier to, attribute significance to one versus another.
Councillor Azim?
That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Councillor Zuzi?
Thank you. Again, I'm sorry I'm not there in the chamber. I just wanted to say that I think the survey is really reflective of what we are hearing from the citizens. And I think it's very impressive that we rank so much higher than similars, and nationally, I think we can be really proud of our service. And so I feel like this confirms that we're heading in the right direction. To me, again, it was very interesting that housing affordability and affordable housing both were priorities, that a lot of citizens were concerned about new construction versus neighborhood preservation. I found very, very interesting, and I think we've got to really be thoughtful about that. That people are concerned about our economic health, that makes sense. Workforce development, I think, again, that's an area where we need to really put some focus. We've been hearing from residents for years about parking. People are very concerned about parking and driving, and I do think we need to be more responsive there. And we also always hear from residents about sidewalks. I know we're improving our sidewalks, but I think we need to put even more attention to sidewalks. So anyway, I kudos to the city. I think the survey has pointed out areas where we can work harder and work better. And I feel like it's a great tool. So Ernie, thank you for your help. And really, again, nice to see the national in the similar benchmarks. Thank you. I yield.
Thank you.
Councillor Nolan and then Councillor McGovern.
Thanks. Yes, I think it is useful through you, Mayor Siddiqui Tlaib. I think we all look at it and understand. And I think part of what we have to remember for all of our work, we're always thinking of how to improve things, and yet this is phenomenal numbers. And I'd love for us in the report itself to note, as Lee said, there are several of those where our ranking is high. And yes, there's a difference, and there's a reason much higher or not. We don't want to suggest we are number one when everyone else is 1 point behind us. However, it is critically important for us all to realize that number 1, 2, or 3 on both a national survey with 350 other and a peer city group is really important. And I think noting that is something that would be good for all of us to know and for the city to know. They took the time to fill out this survey. I think it really is important for residents to know that we're using it and that this is how their participation got reflected in how the city is seen elsewhere. I think on the crosstabs, as Tim Flaherty said, it might be useful. I've done a lot of crosstabs. They can be really incredible, and they can also be a complete time sink. So it might be, if this makes sense, and it wouldn't be too much of a time sink since through you, Mayor Siddiqui, to the city manager and Lee in his office, if there's a few key questions that we'd love to see crosstabs on, it might make sense to say, can you do these crosstabs? These are the ones most important on our mind. We won't send you, I can guarantee you won't get 75, but you may get 7 or 8, and they may be similar from all of us. I think there are a couple key ones that we can probably agree might be really useful, and then maybe those can be pointed out. I think that could be really useful. And then on the demographics, I do agree. It's always a challenge. I mean, we're a city, again, when we have 24% of our entire city being students, they're residents we should be paying attention to. They are residents who live here. It's a combination of college students, but also a lot of graduate students, as we know. And yet there is a difference for residents, and particularly residents and students who are in group quarters may be different than others. So it's hard to slice and dice our data that way, but I know in some of the demographic information, like on income, we actually don't include students in group quarters for some of the reporting that we do. So it would just be important for us to know what we're including and what we're not. And again, on the demographics, you'll never get it perfect, but we did see that, and as I had said about the 125,000, that's the median income. And so when you have that as the median and then no gradation above that, it means you really lose all the flavor of that, as Councilor McGovern pointed out. So it's really important to understand that. And yet those people are actually underrepresented, as astonishing as that may sound to some others. But median salaries across the state are 90,000 and across the country are 60 or 70. So it's not unusual that the city would have more. On the age, I don't think we hit the demographic breakdown the way we would. We're slightly overrepresented on the 65 and over. Councilor Sabrina Rilo pointed out there's a change in a couple of these, and that should not be it. It should be flipped for that, actually, the number of, I looked up the ACS data, which I'm happy to send you. So again, this is a really good survey, and then as we improve it overall, just figure out how it is that we can address some of that, particularly on the age and the employment, because if it's not represented, then we're going to be making policy decisions based on data that's not representative of the whole city. So it's really important we do that. But again, and kudos to all the departments, all of which I think are above 50%, but particularly those DPW and libraries and fire. So I think that's it. I will think of a couple crosstabs that, if that makes sense. I do see Lee nodding that it may make sense for us to consider that and then send them and see if we can get those. Thanks so much, Mayor Siddiqui. I yield.
Councilor McGovern?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, through you. Just reiterate also the family size question, especially with the crosstabs. It would really be interesting to see that information. And I'm sorry if I missed this. When was the survey performed?
It was September 15th through the 19th, 2025.
Just, I always wonder when the mental health aspect, if you ask people about sidewalk maintenance after the snowstorm, they might say something really different than in August. So just curious, you can't control, anytime you do it, it's going to play into it, but it's always interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, the vast majority of surveys we've done since 2000 have been either September or October or November, in that time frame, but the vast majority have been in mid-September. So we try to keep that time frame consistent going forward as much as we can.
Thank you.
Councilor Lazubi?
Yeah, just want to reiterate my thanks on this work that you all did. Just a quick question on the gap analysis piece. First, for the survey responders, did they get the chance to respond on each category? Okay, so
yeah,
I feel.
Go ahead, Ernie.
You mean on each of the 13 topic areas?
Yeah.
Yes. Each respondent had an opportunity to respond to all of them.
Okay, I feel like that's an interesting piece, considering I know Councilor McGovern brought up this aspect of like going in depth on issues, especially considering housing is the biggest issue, and we saw that we got that deep dive on the transportation piece. It'd be interesting to see that play out in the housing conversation. I also just want to note that we didn't get as much attention focused on like the class aspect of this survey, and it was interesting to me that if you made less than 50K, you didn't feel as good about the city's overall performance. And so just getting the opportunity to get a little more feedback on how the class aspect of this informs how people feel about either the categories or, the city's performance. Yeah, I think that deep dive on the housing aspect will be important, just because I think despite the language on market housing that is affordable coming from the National Community Survey, it would be helpful to have that conversation because, again, it's working within infrastructure on an approach to housing that not necessarily is the same for everyone.
Thanks, Councilor Lazubi. Other comments, questions? Counselor Simmons, are you all set? Okay. So it's 5. So we do have a half an hour or so left, but doesn't seem like there are any questions. And wanted to just reiterate that my point earlier wasn't to say that, oh, you all haven't incorporated our comments and questions. I know that's happened, but I think we haven't done a great job of kind of actually telling us, you know, at the start, hey, you know, going into this year, this is what we did based on your feedback, but just incorporating it throughout, that would just be helpful. So I'm looking forward to that next year, and some of the other follow-ups that my counselors had, feel free to share with city staff. So seeing no further questions or comments, we'll go ahead and do a roll call on adjourning.
Counselor El-Zubi.
Yes.
Yes. Vice Mayor Azim.
Yes.
Yes. Counselor Flaherty.
Yes.
Yes. Counselor McGovern. Yes. Counselor Nolan.
Yes.
Yes. Counselor Simmons.
Yes.
Yes. Counselor Sabrina Wheeler.
Yes.
Yes. Counselor Zusi.
Yes.
Yes. Mayor Siddiqui.
Yes,
Yes. And you have 9 members recorded in the affirmative.
we are adjourned. Good night.
Right.